All right, welcome back. It's COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester, and it's week 9, part 2 of our broadcast, and we're talking about object-oriented programming with JavaScript. It's a part 4 in the series, using classes and libraries again. We're going to continue this one. So for today, I've switched up the lesson. I'm using COMP125 S2018 lesson B, 9B, so please download this one. It's just a clean copy of what I did yesterday, but I've also included in the assets images folder, I've added an image called the click me button. It looks like this, click me, right? I know it's really exciting making a button, right? And the way I created it, by the way, is here's my project. I did it with Fireworks. So it's just a simple by Adobe. It's on the CS Creative Suite 6. Library, if you will, of Adobe products. They have Illustrator, Photoshop, and so on. I'm just using to use Fireworks because it's pretty simple. And it allows you to create simple images and that kind of stuff, right? So I made the click me button, and really what it is a PNG image. So I can change up the text of the button, whatever I want, save it as another image later on. That's what I've done. So I've got the image that's inside of the project. So if you look at COMP125 S2018 lesson 9B, it will include this button. But to make it simple, if you want to follow along with your own project today, I'm going to put it up on Slack as well. So just like I've done for the other classes, I'm just going to go with Slack and drag and drop the button onto Slack. So you can have it both there as well as the GitHub project. Okay, so there it is. It's not really that impressive or anything. It's just a very simple image that says click me. Okay. So what I want to start today with, before I get into the PowerPoint stuff, is I want to make a button class with you guys, and this will be your exercise for today, right? And I want you guys to think about this. So what I want to do is I want to take the image object or the image class that exists in JavaScript and extend it. So an existing class that we have from JavaScript, making it a little bit bigger, all right? Or specializing it a little bit more. So how do we do this? So first thing, again, I have a project. The project I've already kind of set up for you. The only changes I've made to the project, there's 2 changes. One, it has a README file, which is right here. Not a big deal. It's just a README to give you some information. As well as, that's really loud, as well as inside the index.html, I have another tag in there that's called button section, a div tag that I added. 1 second. All right, there we go. So that interruption is gone. So we have this, this button section, and the button section has, or the div with an ID of button section. Actually, we can even change the div to a section, semantic HTML element if you really want to. I really don't care about that right now. All I care about is we have a target for where the button is going to appear. Okay, that's what this is. And so what I want to do in the objects folder, I've created a scaffold, an empty button, like an empty module. I've removed the person and the student classes so that there's nothing in there. I'm just doing this to speed up the stuff we're going to do today, as opposed to you having to do it with me from scratch. I did that already for you. So if you just download this project, and that's like COMP125 S2018 lesson 9B, we'll be on the way to Creator Button. All right, so again, if you follow the instructions online, I've put out the instructions on Easeljs for Lab 8, I believe, and it's OOP buttons is what it's called, okay, on Lab 8. And it's pretty simple. It's what I've asked you to do. Oh, okay, let me take that back. I think it's pretty simple, but I've also noticed that only a handful of people are doing the labs. That's not a good thing, because it means that you're not practicing. And then you're going to get an assignment that's a little bigger, and then you're not going to be able to do it. So even though it looks like a lot, it's not really a lot. All I'm doing is step by step. That's what this is. This particular lab is a step-by-step instruction of what I want you to do. This is your challenge today, okay? So again, using exercise files from class, which I just gave you, create a button class that extends the JavaScript image class. That's what it's doing. And the button class should be created in a separate file. We already have that uses the JavaScript module pattern. And the modules should be called objects, which we've already done for you. We're going to make a constructor function of the button class that takes 3 parameters: source, width, and height. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm going to use the ECMAScript 6 class pattern as opposed to the traditional older one, because we've done that already. So again, you do this. We would say class. Again, this is the learnings we're doing today, right? The name of the class, button. I'm using a capital B button for the class name. And then I'm going to use the extends keyword, right, which is telling it that it's going to inherit from something else. I'm going to inherit from a standard class that we already have called image. Image is a class that exists in JavaScript. It's built in. And what it allows us to do is load an image onto this object. And we can attach the image to the page. Okay, so that's what it does. And if you want to get documentation on this, let's go to the documentation for the image class. So if I say image class JavaScript, how to do that. And if you look at there's a couple of places. One of the ones you want to look at is this HTML DOM image object. All right. And you can see that it takes 2 parameters. There's a bunch of parameters it has, but by default, the constructor itself, what it does is it creates this image element, right? So instead of you doing a HTML create element image, that's the other way to do it, you can use the image object, which exists in JavaScript, okay? So again, it's like doing document.create element, but we're not doing document.create element, we're just using a new image. It has a bunch of stuff. And notice that there are some stuff that says not supported. Please don't use the not supported stuff. This is the reason why it says not supported is because there's some older stuff. Remember, JavaScript has gone through an evolution, and so has HTML. And at times, at one point, they had other things in there because CSS3 wasn't a thing. It was a CSS2, right? And so we use JavaScript to do some CSS stuff. And we try not to do that these days. But there are some things in here that we can gain. For example, one of the things we want to use is the source, the SRC property. There's also natural height and natural width, all right, which we have. And there's also, it says sets or returns the value of the width attribute of an image. We're going to override the width, right? Well, we're going to actually load a new width and height. There's also width and height. So we can actually sets or the image width manually. We're going to do that manually with our new button class. Okay? So I'm using the image to display the button, but it's not really a button. It's just an image. Okay? But we're going to make it look like it's a button of our own. We can dress up the button any way we want. So the advantage of doing this as opposed to using Bootstrap, as an example, is we can make our buttons look like the way we want to and has nothing to do with CSS or whatever. We can dress it up, make it look custom, a custom button or whatever, a special button, and it'll be a lot easier to do it this way than with CSS, because CSS you'd have a lot of lines of code and all this kind of stuff. This way you can dress it up. You can have your artist design the buttons, like physically draw the buttons out, and then in different states of the buttons, the over state or the out state, all these other things. For us, we're going to make it simple. And we're going to, use this button class itself, to extend the stuff that we have. Yes.
So meaning that in this case, this image button will not have any states.
We'll create the states. That's what I'm going to say. All right. Okay. So just like we've done before, we've done this class of image. Now we want to attach it to the objects module. So the way to do that, of course, in module pattern is objects.button is equal to button. Okay, and then what that does is it attaches the button class to the objects module. Now, I've done this a bunch of times on purpose, so you can see it over and over again. I'm repeating myself, so you can see that this module pattern, the way it works. Okay, so here's the module itself, objects. We have the syntax for the module pattern here, and we're attaching the button class to the module by using this line right here. So this is our button class, but in the button class, we're going to use a constructor. And the constructor is whenever we use a constructor and we're extending something like this image, a standard class, as an example, what we want to do is always call the super constructor. So super must be called. Okay? So far, it's empty. We're not actually doing anything. And if you look at the super constructor, right, for this thing, it doesn't take the super constructor, because it's an image, the image requires an optional width element and or parameter and an optional height parameter. That's what it requires. We're going to pass the height and width, or width and height, to the super constructor. Okay? Again, this should be reminiscent of the stuff that you're doing with COMP125, or 123, sorry, with object-oriented programming with C#. Very similar. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pass in a couple things. The source, which is a string, right? So where I'm getting the source of the button, like the source image. Think about it as a source path. We can actually call it source path. I'm just going to call it source. And also the width and the height of the button. So we're getting those three parameters. I'm going to make them all optional. So I'm going to say the width is going to be 0. The height by default is going to be 0 as well. We just did that. And the source is going to be a string. So all those parameters are now optional. I'm doing that in the constructor function, right? That's not part of your lab. I'm just doing that right now.
Source. But then the button would just be.
But then I can assign the source light later, right? If I really wanted to, I can set source. Okay, so I'm going to pass in the width and the height from the constructor. That's what I'm going to do into the super constructor, right? So the constructor function takes in 3 parameters, but I'm going to pass 2 of them directly into the super constructor, right? Which is going to be calling the image, the default image object's constructor, because the image object has a constructor of its own, and it takes 2 objects, width and height, as options, right? So that's the first step. Okay, let's do some comments. So I'm going to kind of go here and do the comments that I kind of talked about before. There's my document this that adds in the parameters. So it says creates an instance of the button class, right? And notice that it also says that source and width and these square brackets, the documentation basically says that these things are optionals. Okay, those are the params. There's the constructor. We're good. And if I just did this, the button wouldn't do anything. All I want to do right now, step by step, right, is I want to show the button on the screen. Okay. Now I've done some work for you already in the index.html. I've already connected the button class itself to the script, so it's already there. If you downloaded my little app that I made, right, it's pretty simple. And what I want to do in the core app.js is use it. Okay. So, but I want to give me some code hinting. So we talked about code hinting before. I've got this objects.d.ts. that I've put inside the core folder. Okay, this is just for code hinting. And notice that it's empty right now. And the way I would do the code hinting, just like before, is I would go in here and start typing export class and the name of the class, which is button. And inside the button, I would have a constructor. It's almost like I'm doing it again. But this time, I'm giving more details. I'm saying something like, well, my source is going to be of type string. My width is going to be number, and my height is also going to be a number. That's all I really need, right? I'm also going to tell that they're optionals by assigning the same values. Now, later on, we won't have to do this, because if you ever use TypeScript, which I'm going to try and get you guys to learn by the end of the semester, we'll see how it goes. 0. So if I do this as an example, before I start using it in my app.js, I'm going to declare a button object. So I'm going to say, so it's my button. So let's say button. And let's give it a name, like some kind of friendly name. It's going to be the click me button, right? So we'll say click me button, right? That's what that is. That's the variable. And if I want to use it in my start method, which we use for initializing, right, I can say that the click me button is equal to a new objects dot button, right? By the way, if you don't get the objects dot button, like you notice I didn't get any code hinting. Remember I talked about this? Sometimes what happens is I have to shut down and restart my Visual Studio Code to get some good code hinting. But at the end of the day, what I really want to do is when I export the class button here, all I'm doing is I'm defining just some information about what the button class is about, right? In my app.js, when I use the click me button, what I'm hoping to get is some information. In this particular case, I didn't get it, but it's fine. I'm not concerned about it. When I did this thing at home, it worked perfect. Here, no framework.
How are you running? As in, like, what is it? Is it just a standalone?
It's just a app.js file, and I'm running it inside my index.html. So, and I haven't tested this out yet, because I'm not running a light server or anything, but I'm going to do that in a second. Actually, I don't know if I am running a light server. Maybe I am. I'm not. So say light, I'll just do light dash server, just so we kick off the local server that we're going to use. Okay, good. So you can double click on the browser, but when you use a button, when you load a button, it's good to have a server, right? Yes, I know. Yeah, because you need, remember that in real life, you have a server. You're not going to double click on anything, all right? So that's why I've gotten you to use light server the whole time, because it's more realistic, right? Double clicking is not something we do, okay? That's just if you want to just test to see if the index.html is attached to anything. But because we have so much complexity that we're going to add, please don't do that. Please use light server, HTTP server, some kind of server, Python, whatever. Put it live, but you need something live. Okay, so we know that our button needs 3 parameters. One of them is the path. I already have this button. Remember, I put the button inside my assets. So if you look at the button, it's inside assets, images, and it's called clickmebutton.png, right? So if I go there, I can put the path. I can say /assets /images /clickmebutton.png. That's the path of the button. So that's the actual source, right? And then what I want to do is I want to specify the width and the height. I know the width and the height. I'm telling you what they are. 200 by 50 for now. We can figure that automatic stuff out later. And that's what I want to put in. That's the actual button details. But if I go back to my button class for a second, all I've done is pass in the width and the height. I haven't touched the source, right? So let's do that. So in the source, we can say that we can use this keyword, which represents the image itself. So we're going to say this dot, and then if I put source, right? Because source belongs to images. All images have SRCs, sources, and because we're inheriting from the image object, right? Then so too does our button, right? Because the button is a image, is a relationship. So we're going to say that the this.source is equal to source. So we're taking the constructor, and in the constructor, we're taking source, width, and height, and we're saying that the source is the source. Okay, so that's the first thing. So if you go back to my app.js, then when I look at the button itself, I'm taking the path, width, and the height. Okay, that's the click me button, and we've defined click me button up here. Are we good so far? All right, and again, the thing to do, notice that this is grayed out, right? It's grayed out because even though we've defined the button, we've never really used it. And of course, we're going to use it in my main. But in order for us to use it, we need to hook into it, into the index.html somehow. And in the index.html, I have this thing that I talked about, this div tag with an ID of button section that we're going to hook into. So I'm going to go back to my app.js, right? And I'm going to, on the top, I'm going to say that let button section, I'll call it the same way. I'm going to create a variable called button section. And inside of my start method, I'm going to define the variable. Let's say that button section is equal to documents, document.getElementById, and then it's button section, right? Which gives me a reference to the button section that's on the page. That's what this does. So now all I need to do is Appendchild the new button, right? So if I go back down to here into my main, I'm going to say that button section dot Appendchild, and I'm going to pass in my click me button, right? And that, if I did everything correctly, should display. Doesn't have any effects. Doesn't look like a button right now. It looks like just an image, right? Because that's how it works right now. It doesn't do anything.
So the image itself is just the same.
Right? That's all it is. Not yet. Let's add them in. And that's why we're making the button class in the first place. Not just to do this, but to do the hover effects, right? So how do we do that? Going back to the button.js class, inside the constructor function, after the source, we're going to put some event handlers, right? So normally what we would say is like the button.add event listener, but because the button is an image, we can just use this dot add event listener, and we're going to say that mouse over. Here's my mouse over event, and we're going to just use an inline function for this. Right, so there's my inline function. So this is the mouse over event, and just to make it so that we have the mouse out event to give me that change, I can put that in there as well. So mouse over and mouse out. Okay, so mouse over, mouse out. These two events handle the hovering, style, all right, of my mouse and my button. And what I can do is here, instead of what I'm going to do, you can swap the image here. If I had multiple versions of the image, I can change the image to whatever I want, adding different colors or whatever, a highlight, some kind of bold, some kind of shadow effect, whatever you want. For me, to make it simple, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say this dot. And again, remember that this is an HTML element. It's an HTML element. Even if it's a button or an image, it's still an HTML element, which means I can hit the style, right? And then I can look at opacity, so the opacity of the button, and I can set the opacity to 0.7, which sets the transparency to like 30%, right? So 70% opaque, 30% transparent. And it's alpha transparency is what we're talking about here, alpha transparency. And of course, I want to do the opposite when I hover out. So when I hover over, it becomes transparent a little bit. When I hover out, it goes 100% opaque, right? So sets the alpha transparency to 0, right?
So if you actually don't do
correct. Once I modify the style, it stays modified, right? This way, it goes back. It kind of toggles between 0.7 and 1, right? Every time I hover in and out. So if it worked, if I'm saving the file and I go back, now if I hover over, I get this hover effect immediately, right? So I've got a button-looking thing, right? Doesn't do anything when I click on it. And also to note, if I look at the console log, which is what we want to do, you can see that here's my app initializing, here's my app started. Doesn't do anything. So what we want to do, we don't want to corrupt this button. So the button works. Everything works nice. And by the way, if remember we talked about this comment style, we can actually move the comments if we want from there to the objects.d.ts, because that would do it as well. So if I went to here, that's where I really want it to be. The comments, because that's where we're going to get the support eventually. But more or less, when I have this button back inside the app.js, and if I hover over it, right, this is where I'm getting this. I'm creating a button. I'm creating a kind of linking into this button section. And then down in here, I'm appending Appendchild. The reason why Appendchild is I'm actually physically creating an image element with stuff. So if I actually was to look at it before I append it, so let's do a console log. We'll do a console.log, and I'll pump out the click me button, see what it is, right? So what is it? It is an image. Look, here's the image right here. And it tells you 200 by 50 pixels or whatever, because that's what I set it up to be. And what it does, it sets the width and the height of the image when because of my constructor that I've used, right? So that's what it does. It actually creates an image element. All right, so that's what this is. It's an image element, and that's why we can append child. We're appending child, appending a new image into the button section, which I've created, a div tag with an ID of button section. That's where it's going, okay? But it doesn't do anything. So let's create an event handler to do that. Now, okay, we could create an event handler inside the button.js, but if we're going to make a generic button class that can make any button, then each click event will be different. We could create a method for the button that allows us to set, as an example, the click event. So set click event. I don't know, make a method. And then what it'll do is that method, when you set the click event, it'll actually be that one that's being active, not the one that that I've defined in here. But to keep it simple, without confusing you too much more, I'm going to go into the app.js and put the event handler here. So I'm going to say that my click me button, add event listener, click. So the click event, I'll do an inline function again, right? So this is an anonymous inline function. And in the click event, what I want to do for now is a console.log with backtick, which says, click me button clicked. I can see that that's working, right? Because I want to be able to check to see if the button is clickable. Right now it should be because it's an HTML element. And again, these are all the checks I'm doing one step at a time as I'm adding my button class. All right, so again, hover over, click on it. Now I get this click me button clicked. So I know the button is working. Now, again, not the prettiest button, but think about this from a practicality perspective. You have a person who's an artist, they do your buttons, and the way your layout works, they can use images, they can use Photoshop to design your buttons the way they like. You program it with JavaScript and it looks exactly how they want it to look, right? And it's a lot easier than, in some ways, than using CSS. Okay, so cool. We have this, but what I really want to do is modify this title. So instead of the title saying COMP125 OOP template, I want to say that when I click the button, then this title will change. Okay, so again, this is review. So what I need to do is I need to hook into the title some way. So let's make a new reference. So I'll say we'll call it the first H1 tag, first H1, right? Is the one that I want to create. Inside the start method where we do an initialization, I'm going to say that the first H1 tag is equal to document get element by tag name, right? This is a different one. And we're going to call the H1 tag, there's the H1 tag. And we want the first one, so we're going to use element 0, right? So that's because remember, elements by tag name returns a array-like structure. We talked about array-like yesterday, which is a collection of elements that match the query, which is H1. But we only care about the first one because there is only one, if I'm not wrong, in this particular case. In the index.html, there's only one. This is the one, right? I don't think there's any other ones. Even if there were, we only care about this one, okay? I could have also used a query selector to look in here and say, okay, I want to find a class that says display4 or a Jumbotron with a class of display4, any kind of CSS query selector would be fine, right? Which one? Depends. In this case, it's just the tag. I only have one, so I know there's only one. In this particular application, it's just fine. But if I had multiple H1s, or if I didn't know which one I want a specific tag, I could do it either by ID, or I could use a query selector to select the tag by using, I don't know, Jumbotron, inside a Jumbotron that has a display4 class. And well, for now, we don't want that. We just want to target the H1, which we've done. So again, I've done that by going back. Here's my app.js, and here's my first H1. I targeted it. Yes, we've got it now. And now what I want to do is inside my click me button.add event listener, instead of doing this, I want to modify the click me button. Let's just change these. I'll keep the text and change these to quotes, right? Backtick doesn't work. And then I'll say something like this. I'll say that the H1 first h1 dot text content is equal to blah, blah. Pretty simple. We've done this before, right? Would you agree? And this, if everything goes well, will allow us to do our button. So if I click on the button now, boom, click me button clicked, right? It doesn't click back, right? It doesn't toggle or anything like that. I could, right? And you know, the way I could do that is every time I click on it, I'll just like say if it's this, then that, or whatever. Or I can use a ternary operator to do it as well, like a toggle. So what was that? Right. Okay. So right click or any click, you know, right click does this context menu by default, right? So right click wouldn't do it because although the hover effect would work because I'm hovering over, right? See the hovering effect? The right click wouldn't do it because right click by default pulls up a context menu. Prevent default behavior, right? So, but here, this is the left click is what we're doing. That's where this is working, right? And it actually allows us to do the click me button. Are we good? That's your lab for today. Try it out. You should try it out. But now here's the rub. One button is okay, but we don't make a button class for one button. We make a button class for multiple buttons, right? So let's think about this. I have one button, right? It's called my click me button, but I want multiple buttons. Maybe I want a start button, or maybe I want to go and do something with the button or whatever. I can add as many buttons as I want now by using the buttons class, my objects.button class, right? And passing in the width and the height parameter. Let's do some other things with the button that's beyond what I asked you to do. So in the button class itself, first of all, let me put this up on GitHub, right? So on GitHub, I've added a button class. I'll say added button class, right? And I'll add all this on, and then I'll click this little check mark and then push, right? And now you'll have everything that I have. So you know what to do. So why am I showing you this then? Because this is a very common way of enhancing the DOM. I have an element on the DOM, and I can enhance it. And there's certain things I can do, certain elements or objects that I already have access to, I can enhance, right? Okay. Let's try something else. I know I have my math class, right, from yesterday. Can I enhance my math class? I want to create a vector, right, that holds 2 points, x and y, right, with my math class. Math is a built-in class in JavaScript, like we know. Is it possible? Because someone's going to think about something like that later on. After we leave, you're going to go, oh, man, that means I can do everything. I can extend everything. Yes and no is the answer. But let's suppose I can. Let's see if I can. So I'm going to create inside my objects. I'm going to make another class for now called vector. For those math lovers out there, then you know what vector is. But so we don't forget, I'm going to add a reference to it inside my index.html. Again, we're splitting across different files here. I'm going to say script, and source, and then scripts, objects, vector. Okay, so our vector, notice it comes in order, button, vector, and then app. Again, these are a dependency that we're putting together up here. We're having these available first before app.js is instantiated, right? All right, so let's go to the vector. So the vector is going to have the same module pattern that we've used already. You guys should know this already, right? So function, we're going to pass in the objects, object, if you will. And we're going to do something like objects or in brackets objects is equal to an object, right? So that's the module pattern syntax to start off, right? That single line. So this is an immediately invoked function expression that passes in the objects a parameter, right? As an example, it makes the objects undefined or any, or in this particular case, an object that's empty. And again, what I want to do is the same thing. I want to do a class, right? This particular case, I want to say the class is the vector class. So now it extends math. Okay, this is the difference. Take a look at the interface math. It says the the intrinsic object that provides basic math functionality and constants. Okay. Immediately we notice there's something different. All right. When I did image, right? Image is actually something else. It's like an image property. That's what it looks like, right? Math or date or some of the other built-in classes, right, behave differently here when we try to extend them. So let's try math, okay? So it extends math, no problem. And we have a constructor, right? We don't know right now what it is. And we're also going to call the superconstructor because you always want that, right? Math. And just press save. Hopefully we won't get any errors, but take a look there. It says type error class extends value object is not a constructor or null at objects vector.js2. I'm just pointing this out because we think that there's all kinds of lovely stuff we can do, but remember that we do have some limitations. All right, because JavaScript allows you to do certain things, with properties that already exist, but with things like if I want to extend the documents, it's not going to work. If I want to extend the navigator, it's not going to work, right? Some other things that actually navigator and document might work because a window may not. So an example of this is if I did something like if I put the window object, yes, I can extend because it has this. See this little symbol here? It's the window object. Math is something different, right? If I said math dot something else, like if I wanted to extend the log method or something like that, natural log, maybe that might work, right? Or E or something. But math class is a funky little thing that that's it just won't work. It's a math object kind of more than a math class. The other thing that if you think about it, if I go navigator is okay. History, I can change all these things. These are all things that I can modify. Somehow math.
What's the sign for math?
This one here? Like it says, an intrinsic object that provides basic math functions. It's not necessarily a, I can't do it this way, put it that way. I won't be able to extend it this way. It's not a property, and I can't, it's not something else that's in JavaScript that I can access, that I can hook into. So I can't change math. I can't extend math, as an example. Because math is for everything. It works for, it's like a kind of a global object that works everywhere else. This is one of those I can't change. All right. I mean, I can make my own vector. That's no problem. I don't have a superconstructor for the vector class because there wouldn't be any, right? Because this is my own, object, vector, right? And here for the constructor, if I was going to continue with this example, I could, some kind of say, well, my x is 0 and my y is 0, because I'm going to have x and y values for my vector, right? I also want to set up x and y, because this is the constructor. I could say something like this dot x is equal to x, and this dot y is equal to y. So I get the x and y values from my vector, right? So I could do that, right? A vector is really, really cool because it allows us to do other things, right? Okay, so just putting it out there for you guys. So here's my constructor, x and y. These are optionals. And I get x and y coordinates for my vector. I want to override the string value, right? So one thing we haven't really covered is, if I go back to my app.js and I want to change my, I don't know, something to a string. Is there, a lot of languages have this idea of a toString function, right? So if I go something like, I don't know, I want to change my button to a string, like click me button dot toString. That's what I want to do. And there is no toString function that's built in, right? That I can see. If I say let my new object, as an example, which is a document dot get element by ID, just give you some code hinting idea. I don't know, blah, right? Whatever the object is. And if I said my new object dot toString, there isn't that. There is no functionality like that, right? Like that. Exactly. However, if I said something like string, I can use the string class, and I can surround my value, right? I can change a value to a string this way, right? So that's one thing I could do. But it would be nice if my vector printed out to a string. Okay, so what does that mean? So when I say something like when I create my vector, oops, back out and can't give me an error anymore. Class value object is not constructor or null vector. Sorry, where is that? My vector JS constructor or null. Did I save it? I did not save it yet. Okay. Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to create a method. Here's my method down here. We haven't talked too much about methods. I want to create a method that actually prints out the vector in a nice way, right? So I'm going to call it the toString method, just like we've seen before. And the vector is going to, it's not going to return anything. Actually, it's going to return the string version of the x and y coordinates. Okay, so I'm going to say return, and then we're going to say something like, and again, you can use backtick here because it is a string, and I can use a template string. I can return a template string instead of a regular string, right? So I could say that as an example. So I want to say a bracket. This is what a vector would look like, plus a $sign. So here's my template, this dot x, right? And then comma, and then a $sign, and then interpolate this dot y, right? And then a bracket. So that would be the vector value, right? Just like we normally would get. So that's what I'm returning. So toString returns this, x and y coordinates. I can enter the x and y here. I can also say that this dot x is equal to something. I don't have any kind of getters and setters right now, but it's pretty simple. My vector doesn't do much. Okay. Going back to the app.js to test it now, I'm going to set up my vector. So let my vector, right? And I want to set up my vector. It has a default of 0, 0. So I should be able to do something like this. In my string, my start method, I should be able to say something like my vector is equal to a new objects.vector. Oh, wait, by the way, one thing to do, sorry, is to give me code hinting. I forgot to do that. I can go into my objects class, which is, it will have a new class that's called vector. And with a constructor that takes x, which is a number, and y, which is also a number, right? That's what the vector class will do. Okay. I'm also going to have a method. So here's my method, which is going to be public. I'm going to call this public method toString, right? And the method toString will return a string. Okay. So I don't have to define the method here. So I'm just not defining it. I'm just doing one of these, right? So that's what this method does. So this is just declaration. It's almost like an interface that I'm creating, right? So export class vector, I got toString, and you know what? I want to define the documentation for this. So I'm going to say my document this, right? So returns a string, member of the vector class, undo. So I can define the documentation. I can say this method returns string representation of the vector. Okay. That makes sense? In the constructor, I take two objects, x and y, so I can do that too. And kind of define the parameters x and y, right? I'm going to do that for a second. I could also say that there's a default value of 0, which is true. So even if you don't enter something, you just create a vector by itself, it's always 0, 0. That's what I'm going to do. Here you go. Creates an instance of the vector. There we go. And just to see if I can get code hinting, I'm going to close all my editors down for a second and reopen my app.js and see. Hopefully that'll do. May not. But I'm going to do something like my vector, right, is equal to a new, use the new keyword, objects, that won't work, dot vector, and I'm going to pass in nothing, right? By default, it's 0, 0, right? And in my main method down in here, I'm going to say console log my vector dot toString. it should print out my vector 0, 0 with my new vector format, right, in the console. Okay, let's see what I did wrong. So objects vector is not a constructor. Objects vector. That always indicates to me that I didn't attach it to the objects class. So if I go to the objects module. So if I go to vector, I forgot to attach it. You can see that that's true. So basically what this is my class vector now is private. It's locked inside of my closure, right? But if I go objects.vector is equal to vector, then I will be able to do 0, 0. I guess that works. Okay. And if I was to change this, just to show you, so if I go into my app.js as an example, here's my app.js. And inside the top where I say vector objects.vector, I can set this to like 3, 5, right? And now it's going to say 3, 5, right? So kind of a string representation of the vector. But I can always do something like this. I can always say that, so after 3, 5, instead of printing out my vector2 string, here's my vector2 string, I can always say my vector.x, let's do some interpolation instead. I can say that the x and y values, I can print those out as well. So I can say here's backtick. So I can say, so the x value, right, is equal to, again, $, my vector.x. I could do it this way too. I can break it out. And I can also do that console log for y. Right? Again, this is just review, guys. I need you guys to understand how all this stuff works. And you can see now that I've got x is 3 and y is 5. Okay, nice and easy. So it does x and y. I have access to the x and y coordinates, right, for a vector. But wouldn't it be nice if I can calculate the distance between two vectors, right? So now I want to extend the math calculation. I want to say, okay, I want to have these 2 points, and I want to calculate the distance between point A and point B, whatever that is, right? So, okay, that's interesting, right? But it wouldn't have to be something that's part of, it's almost like a distance formula, or what we like to call Euclidean distance, right, between the two vectors. But I want it to be something that I don't have to instantiate the vector class to use, right? So a class member, as opposed to something that's going to be instantiated. So it's going to be like almost like a static method that I want to use, a static method. How do I do a static method without instantiating the class itself? Well, here's the beautiful thing about TypeScript, going back to what we talked about, TypeScript. So I want to emulate this idea of what I want to do here in TypeScript. So I want to kind of bring it up TypeScript. I want to do the module objects so we can get the exact code idea. Here's module objects. In fact, let's just bring that whole thing over first. So I'm going to go back to my button.js. Right, here's my button.js, and copy all of it, and bring it over. So far so good. It does everything, right? Oh, I got the wrong one. Let's try that again. I need the vector, not the button. Converted it nicely when I did this. Okay. All right, cool. So we're good to go. It looks okay. It gives me some x's and y's because TypeScript doesn't know what x and y is. So just to help it, we're just going to say for now it's a number and y is also a number. All right, but that should fix some of the issues. But don't worry about this. The idea is that this is exactly the same. But look what it does. It says that to make this x and y optional, it says if x is exactly equal to void, right, then void 0, it says, then make x equal to 0 and y is equal to 0. And this is very interesting. This notation that TypeScript gives us. We don't really need it because it works every other way. But remember, this is compatible with ECMAScript 5. Also notice the prototype toString, right, function that we've made here with template strings. It converts it to the old concatenation way, right? That's what it does here for pure compatibility reasons, okay? Okay, now, what I want to do is I want to create this public. So here's, if I really want to, I can say that this is public. By the way, have an underlying motive. I'm teaching you TypeScript all at the same time. Right? I've been doing it this entire semester, but I'm doing it in a sly, sneaky way, right? So that way, by the end of the semester, you know what to do, right? Without me actually teaching it to you and saying, this is this and this is that, kind of, I'm teaching it to you. One thing to note also is that objects up here, it's going to be an issue because of the objects. So let's just make this a module pattern. So module pattern in TypeScript looks like this, module objects. Okay. And we'll fix the bottom. So there's the objects. We don't need this part because it automatically does it for us, right? So that's what the TypeScript module looks like, nice and clean, right? By the way, we're going to get to this. Not yet, but we will get to it. But notice again on the right, it does exactly what we're supposed to do anyway. It does all that stuff, all the work for us, okay? So what we want to do here is we want to make this thing public static. So how do we do public static? Let's see what TypeScript recommends. So I want to do a public static method that is going to be called distance or something like that. So we'll say call it distance. And I want to pass in a method or a version of my vector. So I'm going to say a vector object has to be passed in. All right. So it's going to be, let's say, vector 1, right, which is a vector, and vector 2, right, which is also a vector. That's what I'm going to pass in here. Okay, so what did it do? Let's take a look at it and see what it did. It said vector.distance. Okay, notice that it's not prototype. There's no prototype here. Okay, it says vector.distance, the vector object itself, .distance, with a function of vec1 and vec2. I'm just pointing it out to you so you guys know what I'm talking about here. So this is my public static. Public static means it's always going to be available. I don't have to instantiate it. It's not part of the prototype, right? It's not in the prototype chain whatsoever, right? It's something that always exists that's part of the vector object itself. This vector object, not the constructor. I'm not modifying the constructor here. I'm modifying the vector object itself, the outside vector object. And I'm adding in a property called distance, right, that allows me to do this function, okay? And it's always available to it, whether I instantiate it or not. So I don't need to do this constructor function in order for me to use the distance formula, okay? I want it to return, so now this public static function actually is going to return a number. So it's going to return. And here's my number that I'm going to return. So I'm just prototyping, right? So think about the distance formula. I'm going to use math, right, for this, square root, because it's really like this. It looks like something like math.square root, right? And I want to get the square root of math.power, right? This is, you can actually do it differently than this, but bear with me, of vec1 or vec2, so we'll say vec2.x, right, minus vec1.x, all right, that's what it does. So math.power of vec2.x minus vec1.x, right? And that's giving me an error. It says expected 2 arguments, we got 1, right? So square root, right, of this. And then that's math.power, and then to the power of 2, right? So that's what this does. So that's the first one. And I want to do the same thing, and I go plus. We'll do it all on one line. I could break this down into multiple lines. Let's just do it all on one line. What the heck? And I'll put this math.power here, and math.power vec.y, and oops, and y. So that's the distance formula. So basically, it's going to return the distance between the square distance between one vector, the x2 minus x1 plus y2 minus y1. That's what it's going to return, the actual distance between 2 vectors. Okay, but I'm actually using the vector class in here. Notice what it does. It says vec1 and vec2, math.square root. It's exactly the same way. So this, my friends, is all I need to do using the old method. Remember, this is using this structure. I don't have this structure in my ECMAScript 6 class. I just have vector.
This is only for compatible.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is something that we got to think about, right? So if I was to take this exact code, which is the translation of what I want, I take this, and I go back to my class. This is the actual vector class now. And before this objects.vector and outside of this vector class here, if I did something like this, would it work? Because that's what I'm doing, right? This vector is not part of this class. I'm actually extending the vector object itself by adding a distance. You see, it's not part of the instantiation, the class itself. It's outside of the class, right? Let's see if that works, okay? Because that's what I want to do. If I go back to here, if I get an error, I don't so far. So now I want to use the distance. I want to create two vectors, vector 1 and vector 2. So going back to that, sorry for the math, guys. I'm really not a math professor. But let's rename this my vector. So let's say my vector will rename. So we can go to a rename symbol. We'll call this vec1. And we'll make another one, let vec2, right? And we'll set up two vectors, one vec1 and vec2. And we'll say that vec2 is some other value. So we'll say that it's going to be, instead of 3, 5, it's going to be like 5, 10 or something like that. Maybe something we can set up so we can calculate. So it's 5, 10. So it's going to be that's the number line that's going to represent 3, 5 to 5, 10. Yay, really exciting. And what I want to do, instead of printing out this, because this is neat and all, first of all, now that I've set them up, what I want to do is I want to use in my main, I want to use my vector objects.vector.distance. So I want to say console.log backtick distance is, and again, I'm going to use my $ and curly braces. I'm going to say objects.vector capital dot distance, right? And to pass in the two vec1 and vec2. Notice I'm getting code hinting now somehow, right? I told you it's not enough, right? And if I pass in vec1, let's pass in vec1 and vec2, right? And that should provide the distance between the two vectors without having to instantiate another one. I'm just using the vectors class, the public static distance equivalent, right, of the vector class to show me the distance between vec1 and vec2. Okay? Distance, 5.38, whatever it's going to be, right? So there's two ways I've done this. Now, and again, this is object-oriented JavaScript, like part 3 or 4, right? So vector, we declared a class up here, and I have a method, a class method called toString, right? This toString method, you need to do it. The only way you can use it is when I instantiate an object of type vector, okay? But this one, which sits outside of the class, but attaches distance to it, it's always available. That's the tricky way of doing it with JavaScript, where the distance is actually a method that's always available to us, whether you instantiate an object of type vector or not. Does that make sense? Is the answer yes or no? The answer is no. You're saying yes, but your eyes are telling me no. I don't understand what the hell you just did. Right? Am I wrong? Okay. Yeah. Let me explain it again one more time. So anything inside the class definition here in this new ECMAScript 6 type class, or if you look at the other one that's online, which is here, the one I explained, this one. This is the old school way of doing it, right? The old school way of doing it is using vector.prototype.toString. Notice I'm not using vector.prototype here. I'm just using vector.whatever. So because it's not part of the prototype, it's not part of the, I'm not attaching it to the prototype. It's something separate. It's a function. If you think about it, I call it a method, public static method, but actually it's a function that's being attached to the object itself that has nothing to do with the prototype, right?
It's a standalone versus.
It's public static, means it's always available, right? But that means I can't access it, right, through the actual vector itself. So I instantiated two vectors. Can I do vec1 dot distance? Because it's not part of the prototype, right? And the vec1 would not inherit it unless I created it as well. So in order for me to use it inside for both the ones that are constructed, right, and the ones that are outside, I have to create this again as another method inside the class. And then it would be available both inside and outside the class. Okay? Right now, it's only available to, you know, to use as a utility method for that's part of the vector class. Okay, that's what it is. And there's many other ones we could do. For example, I could do vector dot right, vector dot right, vector dot up, vector dot down, vector dot left, right? So let's do those. So what I mean by that is I could say something like vector dot right, right? Yeah, I'm enhancing it. My vector dot right is going to be, it's going to take, it's not going to actually take anything, no, but it's going to return a new vector, right? So a new vector object that's going to take two numbers, right? And the two numbers, if I want to go to the right, that means my x value is going to increase by 1, right? So it's going to be 1. And my my y value is not going to change, right? Y is not going to change. So it's going to be 1, 0. That's vector dot right, right? And let's keep going. Let's try this out. So vector dot left would be the other way around. So function, and then I'm going to return a new vector of -1 and 0, right? That's what that's going to be, -1, 0. So I'm going to move left. And let's do some other ones. Vector dot up is going to be a new function. Now, okay, you have to understand what I'm doing here. In normal ways, vector dot up, if I was going to use vector, yes?
You know, vector right above that, why do you have a semicolon after?
This one? Oh, yeah. Well, because I am defining a function. Actually, what I should be doing is putting semicolons after all these, right? Because remember, this is the other function declaration syntax, right? Where I'm attaching the function to the vector. I can't use function keyword and vector and right or distance. Remember, I talked about these two ways. And this is why this syntax, when it comes to creating functions, although it's uncomfortable, is often better. Because you can do this. And you can't do that with the function, the other function syntax, where I say function and I make a name function. This is actually pointing to an anonymous function with this alias. Vector.right is an alias that's pointing to this anonymous function that I'm creating, right? As opposed to function right, which is actually a named function. Okay? However, if you really want to get technical, there's nothing stopping you from doing something like this. That's also perfectly fine, right? But it's really confusing, so we won't do it.
Would you be able to
call? Yes,
right
yes, yes. Inside, it'd be internal to this module, right? All right. So vector right, vector left, vector up, and in my vector up, we're going to say return a new vector. But let's think about what a vector up does. Vector dot up, right? It would normally be a +1 on the y-axis, right? But in truth, when we do computer graphics, +1 is actually down. Because we draw downwards, we don't draw upwards. We start at the top left corner of the screen, we draw across, and we keep going down the screen. When we go down y, right? We don't go up y like this, right? Typically, that's negative. So if I want to go up physically on y, I'm actually doing a -1. Well, for our representation, we're just going to put 1, 0, 1, just to keep it the same. We'll make some other weird things later on to fix that. And vector dot down is equal to a function. All right, now there's something else to notice. Notice that this up and down kind of came up yellow, but left and right are not, because it's trying to identify what those things are, and they're keywords that have been used for other things. So I'm going to return a new vector that's 0 and -1. That's typically what we do, right? So up, down, left, right, no problem, right? And I also want to do vector 0. Vectors dot 0 is equal to function that zeroes it out. And we don't have to do this, we just do this, right? New vector 0, right? Because that is by default 0, 0, right? Sometimes we use these things because left, up, right, down, and 0 might mean something. We want to use it for documentation purposes or clarity when we program our code somewhere, right? But notice I'm adding a lot of different methods here, but these are all public static methods. They're not methods that are part of the vector class, but actually part of it as in stuff that we want to use that for other things. Okay. I also want an addition and a subtraction, right? So I want to be able to add two vectors together. So I want to say vector add, okay, and that's going to be equal to a new function that takes two vectors, vec1 and vec2, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return, right, the addition of those two vectors. So I'm going to say that a new vector, right, that returns vec1.x plus vec2.x, and then vec1.y plus vec2.y. It's going to return those two things, a new vector of that type. That's the addition. So vector.add. I know, guys, this is really exciting, but wait till I use it. Vector.subtract, right, is equal to a function, vec1 and vec2, very similar to add, but the other way around. We're just going to copy it. And we want to say that doesn't matter which way we do it, vec1 and vec2. You might get some negative values. It doesn't matter, right? Subtract 1 from 2. Okay, so add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Let's do that because we can multiply vectors together and all that kind of stuff. But typically, you wouldn't multiply. You'd have a value that you want to multiply a scalar with the vector, right? So I want to scale. So vector.scale, right? And I want to have a number. So with a number, so the scalar. And if you want to make it so that it's uniformly scaled, so both sides are scaled the exact same way, we can maybe even call this uniform scale. Right? So with a scalar, and what it does is it returns a new vector with this multiplier, right? So basically I'm going to say vec1.x multiplied by, I don't pass a vector, just a scalar. Oh, sorry, a scalar in the vector. So that's something we have to. And this, from a documentation perspective, you got to think about how to do this. So I want to scale the vector by a certain amount, right? So I'm going to say the vector first, vec1, and then a scalar, right? So here's my vec1.x. Thank you for that. And then vec1.y, and then times scalar. Right? That's just a uniform scale, right? Because the same scalar. Or I can just scale if you really want to go crazy. And I can decide how much I want to scale. So I know, guys, this is tedious, but I can say scale x and scale y. So I can have different scales for both x and y. And I can return new vector of vec1 times .x times scale x and vec2.x, for a game. I could do that, but I could do it for other things too. Like if I want to draw something on the screen or something. But yeah, I use it for games a lot. But something like this. Vectors are really important because you can set up. But these are all these functions. These are all utility functions. You can see that these are all things that I want to use with my vector, and it gets attached. And I can keep going. By the way, I can do dot product, cross product, right, for the vectors, all the vector addition, subtraction, whatever you want, right? Why would I want to do all this work, right? Because it's so useful when it comes to making stuff, right? So if I go back, now I've got all this stuff. If I go back to my app.js, we'll stop there and go crazy, right? But I want to take these two vectors and I want to add them together. Let's try that out. So that's one of the functions I kind of made. So I'm going to say console log. And then I'm going to say backtick vector 1 plus vector 2, right? And then I'll say $ curly brace. Oops. I don't know what happened there. $ curly brace. And I can go into objects.vector dot add, right? Now, I'm not getting any code hinting for this because I haven't defined it, and I could do it inside of my file, and I'll show you that in a second. Where I need two things, right? Where I want to add my to my vector. I want to add two vectors, so vec1 and vec2. That's what I want, right? And it's going to return the value that I want here, right? So it's going to return the value of what my vec1 and vec2 is, right? However, add, although I'm going to try and print it out, right, is a nice idea. It's a nice idea, but it's just going to return an object, right? It's going to return a new vector object. It won't actually show me the actual object itself because the nice way of making that object, unless, because I'm returning a new object, and please forgive me, I guess, I go .toString. I'm chaining, right? Because I'm actually returning a new object, and so I can use the toString method. ToString method belonging to the object that I'm instantiating when I'm returning it, right? Right, let's try this out. Yeah, right? So you see that I have two objects, right? And one of them, just to check the math, right? One of them is 3. There should be 8 and 15. And that's what I'm getting here, 8 and 15, right? And I'm actually getting the nice way, the string value of the vectors, because I've used my chained method. You can use method chaining like this because this part belongs to the vector class, and this part is the public static method that we're accessing. Public static method, I can access. I don't have to instantiate a vector, right? I can put any numbers in there.
So without toString,
no, if I take the toString away, remember I defined toString, right? So if I take the toString away, then it's just going to make an object, right? Well, actually, it printed it out. I might have done it. Yeah, I might have done that altogether. But I returned a new object, right?
Yes.
And what it's doing is it's accessing the toString value method of the object without me having to do it, right? But I'm just being explicit there. I'm converting it to string, okay? Which is interesting that it's doing that, okay?
Is it because you declared it?
Yeah.
A number has a default string.
Yes, it does. But the whole quote, the way it's printing the showing that thing, like when it's doing that, that's this part here is happening because I define a toString method. All right, so that's interesting. Now, if I want to get code hinting, again, I recommend you'd have to define every public static thing that's in here. So notice I have a class in my export vector, but inside this time, I'd have to make these public static. Let's just do the distance. I won't do everyone because it takes too long, but I would have to do public static, and then let's say the distance, right? Where I take a vec1, which is of type vector, right? And vec2, which is also of type vector, right? And it returns a number. That's what it does. That's what distance does. And let's add some documentation for this. So it does one of these. So this public static method returns the Euclidean distance between two vectors. Actually, Pythagorean distance, but anyways, we're using Pythagorean formula to figure that out. Okay, cool. And then, right, we want to do another one. So we'll do public static add. We did the add. We'll do one add. Add, and we'll have vector1, which is a number, and vector2, which is also a number. But this time it returns something else. It returns a new vector, right? So it returns a new vector. Thank you. You okay? Yeah, and it returns a vector, right? So again, going back to this, so it says this method returns the sum of vector1 plus vector2, right? Notice it says static, which is really, really cool. All right, so that's my documentation piece. And if I go back to my app.js, the hope would be if I hover over this, like I do now, yay, I get all kinds of code hinting, right? Which is what I want to do. So it tells me what I need is of type vector, objects.vector, and so on. Questions around this? This is not part of your exercise today. I'm just want to show you more extensive, full-blown, class that you can do with public and static methods, that you can use for your purposes, right? Remember, I'm trying to build you up to build a web application. That's what I'm trying to build you up for, okay? It takes time. I can't get you guys to be web application builders without understanding the building blocks, right? And we've made some very simple steps today. We've built a button, and we've also done a new vector class. But wouldn't it be nice if we could draw the vector, like draw the line? Oh, now we're getting crazy, right? How the heck do we draw the line in HTML? Is there a way? And there is. We can use something called the canvas element to do that. So let's go back. So if I go to the HTML canvas element, HTML canvas, and if you look at the canvas element itself, it's something that existed with HTML5, right? And what it is I want you to think about it as a dry erase board, all right? So I've got this area that I can define on my page that literally I can paint pixels onto, erase it, and then paint more pixels onto later on, okay? So that's what it really allows me to do, okay? The way it looks is this. I define an ID, let's say for the canvas. I define a width and a height for the canvas. That's the space that it can be defined. And then what I can do is I can draw a line. Now, the way to do that is I have to get a reference to my canvas element. I have to define something called the context. I'm using a 2D context. And then what I can do is I can move to 0, 0. I'm actually taking the pen. That's what I'm doing physically. Think about my pen, an invisible pen, moving it to where I want. And then I'm going to do a line to wherever I want it to go to, and with a stroke. Right now, there's other things we can do here. Right here's the circle example. I can do arcs and a bunch of other stuff. But let's just do a simple line. I want to draw my vector lines wherever I define them. I think this is a good exercise for us, right, to understand the HTML canvas. All right, well, we need one. So first of all, before I do that, let's add this to GitHub, right, because these are all the things I changed. So I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to say added the vector class. It's a very basic vector class, by the way. I'm missing a lot of stuff, right? Added vector class. I did define a more complete one in another place. I will show you later. Added vector class. All right, so then here it is. And push. By the way, for those people who are doing things with Unity, it's all built in. Right? So yeah, so if you look at Unity, Unity is this is something we can model from if we want to make something else. If I went to the Unity 3D docs, right? So here's my user manual for Unity. This is just another thing I want to do for people who are doing gaming, right? And if I wanted to look at the Vector2 class, so in my Vector2 class, see if it'll find it. No, maybe I didn't do that. I didn't search for it properly. I didn't search for it properly. So scripting API, Vector2. Yeah, okay, there it is. Curves. My property lists for curves. Yeah, let's just look it up that way. So say Unity 3D Vector2. Because that's what I'm doing. I'm doing a Vector2. There it is. And so then you see you have down, left. Okay, negative infinity is interesting. I got 1, which does this. So it tells you what it does. Right, up, and 0. Those are all. So we got some of them, but there's other ones. There's magnitude, normalized, square magnitude, x and y. We have different constructors. We have public methods, equals, when I want to compare two vectors to make sure that they're the same. Right, set, toString. I did that already. Angle, distance, dot, lerp. Lerp is an awesome one. When I want to linear interpolate between one vector and another, I can find the linear interpolation value, which is interesting. Min, max, move towards, perpendicular, reflect, scale, and a bunch of other ones, right? And also different operator overloads if I want to add or subtract vectors or all this other stuff, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to do. I want to kind of do exactly what Unity did with JavaScript, right? which is way more difficult to do. So, okay, cool. So I've done this, but now I want to add this. I want to add a canvas element, and I want to add it somewhere that I can access it. So I've got my footer, and inside of my Jumbotron, I want to draw the line. So here's my canvas. To make a new HTML canvas, right, with an ID of canvas. We'll just call it canvas. And I want to add some attributes. I want to say that the width is equal to something like, I don't know, 640 pixels. And sorry, let's just out here. And with a height, we'll make it too big. We'll make a height of, I don't know, 320 pixels. No, we'll do 480. Why not? A full game size, an old style game. All right, cool. All right, now you won't see anything. Even though I've defined a canvas, all the canvas is a square area on my page, right? And if you go back to my page itself, it just looks bigger. This is the canvas right here. The canvas area is in here. Okay? So this canvas area in here is where I want to do my drawing, right? Starting off at the top left corner of the canvas, 0, 0, and moving towards the right and down, which is 640 wide by 480 down. Okay? I'm drawing graphics right now, right? Cool, but I want to see the canvas. Let's make some CSS to do that. So I'm going to go to my CSS, app.css. I'm going to say, well, for any canvas element that's on the screen that has a ID of canvas, we'll do a couple things. We'll say that the border is going to be 1 pixel solid black, right? And we'll also say that the background color, right, is going to be white. So we can see the canvas inside of the area. There's my canvas, my friends, right? So this is where my game could be if I wanted to put my game, right? Are we good? All I've done is define my canvas with a little bit of CSS, and right now it's nothing, okay? But I want to draw in there, right? So going back to my example online, which is past it here. If I go to my example online, I don't care about Unity. I care about this, right? I need to define a reference to the canvas. So going back to my code, just like we've done in the past, in my app.js, in the top, right, I'm going to define a wet canvas, okay? And then inside my start method, I'm going to make a reference to it. Again, doesn't matter where. I'm going to say canvas is equal to document.getElementById canvas. Okay, so that's the place I'm going to draw. Now, this is a different kind of element that we haven't explored before. It's a canvas element, all right? And canvas elements also have something called a context. So going down in here, now I'm going to use it in my main method. I'm going to say canvas.context, right? Now, going back to this, it's context, right? I can create a new context variable itself where I'm going to draw the canvas. So let's do that instead, right? So just to keep it simple. So we'll do that. We'll say let context, right? And we'll say that context is equal to canvas, right? And the canvas itself is the canvas.getContext. Get context, then 2D. Right, so we're getting the context. Now that we have a context, almost like I have a way of drawing to the canvas. I'm actually accessing the canvas itself, all right? Physically accessing the canvas, right? And what I want to do now is move my pen. There's an invisible pen that's at a certain position. I'm going to kind of place my pen down on the canvas to draw, right? So the next part is context move to whatever it's going to be. But guess where I'm going to move it to? I'm going to move it to the first vector. So context.move to. Then in my brackets where it says X and Y, I'm going to go with vector 1 because vector 1. Now, here's the thing. Vector 1 doesn't accept. So I got to go vector1.x, right? And then vector1.y because vector 1, X and Y, it goes in there, right? So that's the first thing. And then context dot, and it says draw to, or line to, if you will, line to, and then again I have x and y's, vector2 dot x and vector2 dot y, right? So that's my line, and then it says stroke, which actually draws everything. So context dot stroke. Okay, so if I do this correct, we should have a line. We should have a line that goes from one place to the other. We may not. It's very small. Okay, let's make these more dramatic, the distances, okay? Because my vectors are pretty small right now. My vectors are 3, 5 to 5, 10. We'll say that it is 100 and 200. And then we're going to go to 300 and 400. Okay, something big. Much bigger step, right? There's my line, okay? And we also know the distance. Here's my distance, 282 pixels between one point and the other point, right? And we also have the vector 1 plus vector 2. It adds up to 400 and 600, right? That we don't need, really. I mean, let's have that for a thing. But the line drawing is pretty neat, right? We can draw whatever we want based on our vector class, right? So as opposed to trying to figure out x's and y's, we have that information, and we have the ability for me to find the distance between the two, which is what I want. This is not something that we get unless we build it, right? 282 pixels. So why all this stuff? Like, why are we doing this drawing stuff? Well, it's a demonstration, number one, but the ability for us to tap into the canvas element, right? And if I want to move this line, if I draw a line again, it's just going to overdraw. It's going to draw this thing again, right? So if you look at the canvas is a beautiful thing that HTML5 has given us, right? We can draw text as well, right? So canvas will draw text. The canvas will stroke text, right? The canvas can do a lot of different things, different gradients and colors, and all kinds of amazing things that you can do. Images, I can take that button image and draw it to the canvas instead of my HTML element. And remember, right now, the HTML canvas, like it says, visit the complete canvas tutorial, which is neat. They have a complete canvas tutorial here online that allows you to understand how to do the canvas. Let's go to drawing for a second. Okay, so where I can fill a rectangle, I can create a rectangle object and fill it up, like a shape, if you will. And there's the fill style. So this is a little different. We still need the canvas, the context, right, which we would normally get. But all now we're doing is we're getting the fill style and the rectangle, which is the origin. This is my origin piece right here, 0, 0, and the width and the height to make a rectangle, okay? Width and height. So I could do that too, right? If I want to draw a rectangle, right? I don't have a rectangle shape, but I could create we have time. I can create a rectangle class, right? So, and if I want to extend the canvas or the context, if you will, to draw to the canvas, right? I could do that. I can create a, the ability for me to make rectangles of different shapes. Yeah.
Is there any graph class to facilitate drawing that graph?
Mm-hmm. There is. There's tons of stuff. GraphQL. There's Vue.js does it. GraphQL. A bunch of other ones. But the one I want to show you the best, I can do all this by hand, right? And you can see that it takes some time to code everything up. But what I want to go into right now, and I want to be using some of this for the remainder of the semester, is a set of libraries. Remember we talked about tapping into libraries. This is the first day we're doing that. So I can do it by hand, and it's a wonderful thing to understand how to do it by hand and use vanilla.js to do it. Or I can tap into a library called create.js. All right? Now, this is one of my favorite libraries. I use it for my web game program, right? But I want to talk about it with you guys. If you go to createjs.com, there are a bunch of different libraries. One of them is called Easeljs, which is the one I really want to use today. I don't care about the other ones for now, okay? Just Easeljs is what I want to use, okay? So Easeljs, where it is there's an extensive wrapper that wraps around the canvas element that allows me to create the ability for me to control the canvas, and I have a lot of control with the canvas, as opposed to me doing all this myself, right? Going to what you said, I can just use the existing class that exists, right? I can use something. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a great library here that I can use. It's not jQuery. Could I do it myself? Absolutely. It would take me a long time, right? So someone that's created this stuff, now I can extend all this stuff. I can take the elements that are in Easeljs and make my own thing altogether. Okay, first, in order for me to use Easeljs, like any library, I've got to download it or connect to it somehow, just like I did with jQuery. So step one, I'm going to do it with you guys, okay? And then I'm going to put it up. One is I need to get it somehow. And I'm going to use Yarn to get it. Remember we talked about Yarn as my package manager, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say Control-Tab or Control backtick. And I'm going to go into my, I'm going to open up a new session in the PowerShell here. I'm going to say Yarn add. And I want to get Easeljs. It's available for me. So I can say Easeljs, right? And then press enter. And what it's going to do is going to add support for Easeljs inside my application. It's there now. Done. Okay? It's a beautiful thing. Next, I'm going to get some code hinting. Remember, we want code hinting for Easeljs because, hey, I don't want to remember all the API calls by myself. I want Easeljs to help me out. So what I want is to do something like this. I want to say that yarn add @types Easeljs -- dev. We've done this before for jQuery, remember? What this does is it adds the code hinting stuff for Easeljs. If I wanted to add, just for completeness, I'm not going to use the whole library. Yeah? There they are. Sorry, I know it's kind of hard to see when they resolve. So that's for Easeljs. I don't care about the other ones. However, just for completeness, and that's the only reason why I'm adding them, I'll add the other libraries too, okay? Because there's 4 libraries. I don't need them all. There's something called Sound.js if you want to make sounds. There's Tween.js if you want to interpolate between one area and another, do some animation. And there's also Preload.js if you want to preload all your images and files and all that stuff, which we're not going to do, all right? This is not part of this course, at least not now. However, hint, hint, we will be doing an extensive thing about Easeljs and everything else when we get into the TypeScript section of our course, which is later on. And just for Riaz, something I talked about yesterday, I'm going to also talk about server-side JavaScript in one of the weeks, let's say week 13. Okay, just so you have some Node.js. All right?
Yeah, you're not using Node Package Manager.
I am. Yarn is using Node Package Manager for me. Okay, so, and it's actually quicker. So, yeah. So if I go clear, that's great. I've got my images. Let's add the other ones in. Now, the way to add them all together with Yarn, I can add them all at the same time. I can say, let's add Tween.js, let's add Sound.js, let's add Preload.js, right? And I can just use the add keyword to do that. So I can say Yarn add all these things. I want to add all those, right? All the rest of them. And it'll just add all those libraries, right? I don't have to add one. I can add them all, right? And I can also get code hinting for all of them too. I can say yarn add @types, again, Tween.js @types, Sound.js @types, Preload.js, and then -- dev. And what that does, it adds all those files inside my application. I'm not going to use them. I'm only going to use Easel. That's all I need. Okay. For now. So now what have I done? What the heck have I done? I've added 98 files to my application, all right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them up on GitHub right now. So I'm going to say, these are all the things I've added, right? I'm going to say added create.js support, right? Which is what I've done, right? But it's all there. If I want to add it, I can use it. Just like jQuery support. Okay, so great, fantastic. But I need to, in order for me to use the library, I need to call upon it. Like, let's say jQuery, there's Bootstrap. And you know what? Here's my third-party library. I'm going to add Easeljs too. Let's do that. Let's add that in. So I'm going to say script source is equal to /node modules. And notice there's a bunch of other ones now. Here's Easeljs. And then inside my lib folder, and then easeljs.min.js is what I want to add in. We've seen this kind of pattern before. And now I have support for Easeljs. But just Easeljs. The other ones, not available. Very good so far. Okay, cool. So I've got this Easeljs stuff, which we're going to, by the way, continue next week. And what I want to do inside of my application, so if I want to go to my app.js now, what I could do is I could say something like, I want to define a stage. And just to give you a very clear, clean and easy way of doing things, if I look at the stage object inside my documentation, by the way, I will take the documentation for Easeljs and put it on Slack for you guys. So here's the docs for Easeljs. Please take a look at those. So what it is if you look at stage, the stage object, I want you to think about it as a container that layers on top of the canvas element, right? So here's my stage. I need to do something like this. I need to say that I need to create a new stage. I need to pass in some kind of canvas element in there. That's the first thing I need to do. Okay? So going back to my code, right? I'm going to say let stage. Okay? And inside the stage object, I'm going to say something like this. Stage is equal to a new create.js. Notice I get code hinting. create.js.stage, capital S. And it needs a canvas element that I'm going to pass into it. Okay, so I took my canvas element that I made, pass it into the stage. Let's get rid of this stuff, by the way, because that would be really bad. I would be using the stage twice. I don't want that. I just want to use create.js to do it all for me. And in this case, I really don't need the context anymore. My stage is my context. I want you to think of it that way, right? So here's my stage. And what I want to do with the stage is I want to update the stage frequently, as an example, right? So I want to create something called a ticker. I want to use a ticker that's part of the create.js class. Don't worry about it if you don't remember this, guys. So I'm going to say create.js. This is a public static class that I'm going to use called ticker. And then I'm going to say that the frame rate of the ticker is 60 FPS. So this is 60 frames per second. I'm going to wipe and redraw the stage 60 times every second. That's 1 every 16.66 milliseconds, right? And I want to also say that every time there's a tick event, I'm going to create a new event, create.js.ticker.addEventListener. For every tick, I want to call something called my game loop, right? I don't have a game loop. I'm going to make it. It's going to be here. Okay, there's my game loop. So when the ticker triggers, I'm going to call my game loop asynchronously, which means 60 times per second, it's going to call this little function, right? And this function is going to update the stage. When I say update the stage, it's going to clean the stage up and redraw everything on the stage again, over and over again. So fast that our human eyes can't detect it. That's it. It's ready to draw now. You can draw on the stage now, right? So, okay, cool. So, well, let's see if that, first of all, computes. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to go over here, you know, as an example, into my thing, and I should see a blank stage, yeah? But I want to draw. So how do I draw with create.js? That's something that I have to think about, right? So you can see that I have this graphics API. So if I click on graphics for create.js, I can set up this new graphics object. Create.js, what it does is it abstracts. It abstracts all the low-level calls that we just did to move the pen and all that stuff, where I can create something called graphics. I can set up a stroke, right? And notice it says set stroke to style to 1, begin stroke with a certain color, begin fill if I want to, and then draw a circle. I can do that, right? But I really want to draw a line, right? So if I go line 2, right, it has the same graphics is our context. I'm kind of tapping into our context, right? So that's something that I want to do. So I can say move to, I can still do move to. Move to allows me to, and it tells you what it does. It moves the actual pen, defining graphics.move to, moves the X and Y. It says graphics command object to move to and append for more information. Okay, so we can do that. So all the same things that we did before, I can move to, line to, and then stroke, just like I did before. But I can do it with create.js. Here's my stroke. It's all the same thing. So it says stroke, and the stroke itself listens for two objects, two things, the stroke style, as an example, and those two things are both optional, which you'll see in a second. So it says see begin stroke and end stroke. So here's begin stroke as an example, and they give you a lot of times. The good thing about Create.js is it gives you a lot of code hinting and stuff on how to do stuff, right? But let's just see if I can do this without really knowing too much, right? So I want to say something like, and I want to set my graphics up here, so I'll say let graphics, right? And I want to set up my graphics up here, so I'm going to say something like graphics is equal to new create.js dot graphics, the graphics object. That's the graphics context now. That's what this does. So once I have my graphics object down in here, I can say that graphics dot move to, and again, I can go vector 1, right? Graphics dot draw to, or line 2, sorry, vector 2, and then graphics, the way we used to do it is graphics dot stroke, right? That should be very similar to what we've done with our canvas in the past, where we had a line that goes through. But we have a problem. It says graphics.stroke is not a function, right? I forgot how to do it. Simple objects, right? Drawing. Graphics dot. So I got to go to the library here. Here's my API. This is an API library, right? So here's stroke with a capital S. I used lowercase s. And that's why it didn't work. Stroke. And go back to here. You know, still it says graphics.stroke is not a function, right? So it doesn't like that. Did I make a mistake? Did I? Oh, yes, of course. Graphic.stroke, right? But graphics itself, let's take a look before I do this, because the documentation is what I really want. So the graphics.stroke class is what I want, and the stroke class itself has some methods, linear gradient and so on, ignore, scale, and style, right? So again, if I go to my graphics API, just the graphics class itself, it shows the get set stroke style to 1, and then begin stroke, and I believe there's end stroke, begin fill, draw rect. I want to draw a line. I'm running out of time. Of course, it's always like this. Here's my tiny API. Oh yeah, tiny does this, and the constructor is this. Draw to, oh, draw. That's what draw does. Draws the display object into the specified context, ignoring visible alpha shadow. Okay, so I could do that, but I need a bit of code. I need a bit of hinting on how to do that, right? Because draw might do it, but I believe it's just line 2 and draw. I'll try it. I mean, graphics.draw, sure. That's a function, if I'm not wrong. No. What does it give me? It says canvas to render, the canvas context to render. Yeah. Yeah, see, cannot read property begin path of undefined. I don't think so. I think it's, you have to actually add other things in here. So begin stroke. Or set stroke style, and it says a number, the thickness, that's the first number. So let's say a thickness of 1, and the rest of it is all, variable. That's so good, but no, we haven't drawn everything yet. So set stroke style, and almost there, guys. Give me one more second. I do apologize. Just got to figure this out. But it's a really neat library. Yeah, I'm thinking that I have to do that too, but let's just go back there. So it says, here's begin stroke with us. So this is, I need to do, and I probably need to do this before I actually move my pens around. But let's say begin stroke of a color. Let's make it black. So graphics dot begin stroke and I pass in a color, so string. So and again, probably nothing yet because I think we're still missing the draw. I'm wondering if I just have to put draw to draw a line. And let's just look it up. I don't have time. I'm running out of time here. So Easeljs, draw a line. Hopefully that's not the same thing. No, it's exactly the same thing. I want an example. Draw a line. Come on, guys. And a line is a shape. They're doing it a different way. Move to line 2, and end stroke. There we go. Okay, well, let's see if I can do end stroke and see if it works. So graphics, end stroke. I don't think this is enough because the graphics is not part of a shape. And I believe what we have to do, they've encapsulated inside of a shape object. So the line is the shape itself. And what I'm doing is, oh, of course, I have to add it to the shape. I have to add it to the stage. So that's one thing I didn't do. So I didn't say my graphics is the actual context, but I need to make a new line. So which is line is a shape. Let's line. And I know this is like a more complex example, but hey, why not? Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that the stage.addChild line, but I need to make a reference to the graphics object, which is done, I believe. Oh, they're using this line.graphics.strokeStyle. I have to pass in the graphics. That's what I do. So when I create a shape, I pass in the when I create a shape itself, I can pass in the graphics object right there. So I can say graphics. And I got nothing. Line 2. No, it's the same thing, though. Same exact thing that I'm doing. It's just that, here, sorry, guys. Move to line 2. I've got line 2 again. Oh, another line 2. This is just dropping more than one line. Line 2, end stroke, and then another line. Does another line, adds it on, and stage.update. But we're doing stage.update. But I believe what I have to do is I have to stroke style and begin stroke before we move to in line 2. I think it's just the wrong order. Like I'm setting the stroke style before this is done. So I got to do this, and I got to do this before I do the other stuff, which is here. And nothing. Let's make my line. Oh yeah. God damn it. See, that's what happens when you're cracked like me. I'm vec1.y and vec2. Thank you for that. Vec2.x probably was going to draw anyway, and vec2.y. It has to be. There's one. Woof. Okay, but this is the really great thing. But the other thing, what you can do, thank you for that. Because we're updating the line, if I want to move this line now, right? So I set the line up for a specific spot, and I want to move this line somewhere else. This line is set. This is a graphic object, right? So the graphics, what I want to do is I want to move my vector to somewhere else. I want to redraw the line over and over again. The line is an object, right? And what I can do is the line itself, I can say that the x and y coordinates, let's say if I want to say something like line, I'm not sure if I can do that, but rotation is plus equals to 5. You know, sometimes it's easy as doing one of these, right, where I can modify the line. Now that it's a line, I can rotate the crap out of it, right? I can do all kinds of stuff to it, right? It's kind of weird. Or I can say that line dot x, I want to move it across the stage really quickly, plus equals to 1. So I have 1 pixel every frame. I want to move the line across, some simple animation, right? And it'll keep moving off the stage until it's gone, right? But the idea with it is that, well, because it's not going to stop. It's just going to keep moving to the right, right? But the idea is that you can make whatever events you want right in the game loop. So lots of control, right? But the idea is that once you've created an object and it's been added to the stage, this gets added to the stage as a display object. The stage is actually a display list, which is an array of objects. And then I can add as many objects to the stage as I want, and I can move them around. All right, this is pretty good. I think we have to stop here for today. Please do your exercise, due tonight by midnight. And it's a very simple button that I ask you to do. Next week, we'll go into more complex stuff with Ajax. All right, so I'm going to put this up online for you.
Are we going to be getting more into the Canvas stuff?
Later. I can't do it now. Yeah.
Oh, I'm curious. Get into the fun stuff.
That is the fun stuff. So it makes it fun. Remember, I can always hide the canvas, right? I made the canvas look like a canvas, but I can always hide it. If I want special effects to happen on a web page to make it look awesome, like I want it to rain on the web page, the canvas can be the size of the web page. It's just a layer on behind the web page, right? And I can use it so that it doesn't, so everything layers on top of the web page. And so the canvas is behind and you can see rain. You know, the whole web page can rain. But it's just lines and stuff on the context, and I'm moving them every frame using JavaScript. Okay, so let's save this up. Sorry, before I forget. So I'll add a simple line to the stage. So I've done. But I'm using my vector class, which is what I really wanted to do. I want to use my vector class to define, thank you for that, by the way, again. I want to use my vector class to define a line. And this is interesting because what this allows me to do, this context, it's a wrapper. Graphics is the actual stroke I'm doing, but it's being encapsulated inside of a shape called a line. And now that's why I can do plus equals. So I want to move the line around, and I don't have to worry about calculating the new line. CreateJS will do all that stuff for me, which does all your graphing, right? All right, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week.